Hello everyone, my name's Kyle, and this will be the third video installment in my YouTube lecture series about religious undertones as to why we exist. Today's going to be a little bit less on the religious end and focus a bit more on, logic. So today we'll be talking about what is consciousness. Now, when you take the word conscious in English, you can break it up into two different words. Now, and I don't mean this in an etymology sense with where the word comes from. I just mean you can turn it into the words con and science, which will basically circle around to the end here, which is that for us to believe that we're the only things that is conscious is a con science, because everything is consciousness. Now, when we talk about human consciousness, which is the most interactive form of consciousness that we believe we see in reality, there's different types of consciousness. You can have brain fog. A lot of people report having that when they're older, which becomes a bit harder for them to focus on things. You can feel alert. You can feel tired. You could be drunk or other types of intoxicated, because if someone's drank, a 12-pack of beer, would you expect them to effectively talk about derivatives in the housing market? No. So when we talk about consciousness in people, it's basically changed about by the mechanisms inside of the brain, while other types of consciousness that we'll discuss are more so changed about by the mechanisms physiologically on a greater sense. So with human consciousness, it's basically controlled by brain chemistry. So science will tell us that molecules create thoughts, because if you didn't have the right amount of potassium or oxygen or iron in your blood, you couldn't function properly and you couldn't think. But religion tells us the opposite. They say that thoughts create molecules. And this is fundamentally why religion and science are always fighting, is because if they could both agree that one of them is saying the object creates the subject and the other one's saying the subject creates the object, when in reality those two are interdependent. There can be no object without a subject, and there can be no subject without an object. And this idea kind of brings me to this story that I had first been told about or heard from Alan Watts, who's this British philosopher from the 20th century. And he tells the story about an astronaut who goes into space, and when he comes back, he's asked if he went to heaven, and his response is, "I saw God, and she is black." Which at the time and still to today is kind of a little bit of a shocking statement, because on the human perspective, or the human side of interaction, if you were a black female, that's a relatively harder socioeconomic standpoint to be in than it would be for me specifically. And the reason that it still makes sense to say that God is this black female is because the female gender or the female force is representative of creation or birthing. So in our body, we have cells that are made up of molecules, that are made up of atoms, that if you believe in Albert Einstein's string theory, that inside of all of those are just these small, little, oval or elliptical shaped things that vibrate back and forth very quickly, that create all of the bigger things. Now, that being said, these things couldn't just exist forever, because the universe is expanding ever since the Big Bang, so it would make sense that there has to be new ones since we're taking up more space. And that's because there is this ever permeating ether that exists behind everything. It's what everything pops out of. So mathematically 2 comes from 1, because 1 plus 1 is 2. And 3 comes from 2 because 1 plus 2 is 3. You can do this with any number. It can be built up by smaller ones. But the entire number system leads back to 1, which comes out of 0. And that would be this, the ether that I was talking about. And the reason we would say that it's black is because the things that we interact with are based off of light bouncing off of things, which is why we can say, "Oh man, my beard is mostly brown, but it's got some red colors to it." That's because there's light moving about. However, when there's not light, there's no potential for there to, be this beard. It's because there's the nothingness. But the nothingness is what creates this. And that's why it actually makes perfect sense to say God is black. So that's the part on human consciousness. Now, with animal consciousness, for anyone that has a pet, you'll say, oh man, my pet has a personality, which is a human quality based off of consciousness, through our average perception of the world. So if someone has a dog, they'll say, oh man, my dog loves going on walks, and this is its favorite path to go on because it always starts wagging its tail and running really fast. Or, I have a cat who's very selective about what they eat, to the point where if you don't give them the type of food they want, they just won't eat it and they'll starve all day. Which makes it very difficult because my cat has a very complex personality. Now, one of the other cats I have, her name's Tara. She is a Himalayan, and she lays on her back a lot, so her hair gets matted and I'll have to cut it out. However, this cat's, not unaware of the world. If she sees me carrying a pair of scissors, she's going to freak out because she doesn't like getting her fur cut. So what happens is I have to hide the scissors in my pocket, I have to sit her down, pet her until she's purring, and then I have to slowly snip at the mats that I'm trying to get out of her, while still periodically stopping to pet her to keep her calm. And it's because of this that, animals have the ability to think. The difference is they don't have the same brain as us, so we obviously couldn't expect them to function on the same level. For example, the Ford Model T and a Ford F-150, they're both vehicles, but would you expect them to have the same amount of, towing capacity or speed that they could drive? Well, no. That's because although they both do the same thing, which is work as a vehicle to move you, your brain, or really just anything that exists, is a vehicle designed to interact with itself. But some of them are more complex than others, which allows them to do things at a higher level. So now moving on to non-living consciousness. If we go back to the brain chemistry idea and we take the scientific view that says that molecules create consciousness, we would be able to say that, well, then all types of rocks and minerals are actually just very rudimentary forms of consciousness. So if you look at a tree growing out of the ground, they all do the same fractalized pattern, which is they grow out in this one big trunk, and then they split off into two parts, and then each one of those two parts splits off into two again, and it keeps doing this. Don't believe me? Go outside and look at a tree. Okay. Along with that, crystals, whether it be the things that are in necklaces and jewelry, or the crystal glasses that you drink out of, crystals, by definition, are actually just repeated patterns in a geometric way. So when you look at the crystals that are in glasses, all of the types of crystals have the same pattern to them, or technically even a chessboard is a crystal, because it's just a repetitious geometric pattern. And for there to be something like that, which is so complex and all over the planet, that's this repeating pattern, it would make sense that there's some type of consciousness involved in it. So if we say that consciousness makes molecules, that basically means that everything is information, because it requires this sense of relativity to say, well, this is a square, this is a circle, you can put them together in this shape, and that way, then when you have a crystal design and you put a bunch of them together and turn it into a glass, when you fill it with water, you can dip your fingers in it and rub it on the top to make these sounds, because, it requires all of this information. So, if everything is consciousness, the argument that I'm going to make overarchingly in this entire series is that you need to be mindful of everything. Now, I'm not saying that you should take this in the Janus sense and carry a broom in front of you and brush the ground you walk on, because Janists who do this brush the ground in front of them so they don't step on bugs because they don't want to hurt anything. Now, although this could be incredibly useful, this isn't the first step I'm suggesting, and this isn't even the message of this conversation. Because if you literally take what I'm saying right now, which is, oh, everything's conscious, and be mindful to it, you could come back and argue, oh, well, then you're saying never eat. Let's all become breatharians. And the science will tell you that's not a good idea. I advocate fasting, but you can't just never eat anything. It's not going to work that way for you, because we are these molecule systems that need to be continuously updated and changed. And if you watched the first two videos to tie them into this, I talked about how we're actually just love and compassion manifest through everything. And to be love and compassion, you have to be the highest form of love, which would be empathy, which is understanding someone else. And to understand someone, you have to be able to love them.